Most military videos begin with the fighter pull, the missile launch, or the ship turning hard into the wind. This briefing starts somewhere less glamorous and more important. It starts with the aircraft that keep the glamorous aircraft alive in the first place. It starts with the flights that move people, parts, planning time, fuel pressure, and operational confidence across an ocean before the audience even knows a war has started. Wars are often decided by the aircraft nobody puts on posters. That is the core idea in this briefing. Not every campaign fails because the front line loses courage. Many campaigns fail because the support system behind the front line begins to run late, then thin, then nervous, then brittle. A runway closes. A tanker schedule slips. A maintenance queue grows. A cargo load misses a connection. A carrier receives less than it expected. A commander is told the air bridge still exists, but the air bridge no longer moves with the same confidence, volume, or speed. That change does not look dramatic on camera. It still changes the war. This is not a claim of secret access. It is a public operational reconstruction built from how modern fleets, air wings, and support chains actually function. The point is not to pretend that one named crisis unfolded exactly in the sequence described here. The point is to show why modern military tempo depends on a class of aircraft and a class of crews that almost never receive the credit they deserve. People talk about striking power as if it begins on the trigger. In reality, striking power begins in scheduling, loading, maintenance, routing, fueling, deconfliction, and patience. The aircraft that keep a war alive do at least 4 jobs at once. They move fuel and parts into the system. They move specialized people into the system. They move information and timing across the system. And they buy decision makers the illusion that tomorrow will still look manageable. Once that illusion weakens, commanders become careful in ways that are easy to misunderstand from the outside. They do not necessarily stop flying. They stop spending aircraft with the same confidence. They stop approving the same margins. They stop treating recovery as automatic. They begin to ask whether every mission launched today can still be supported 3 days from now. If one runway closes, one corridor becomes dangerous, one replenishment ship is delayed, or one maintenance bottleneck expands faster than expected, that is when the campaign changes character. Most people imagine logistics as a warehouse problem. In a military air campaign, logistics is a tempo problem. A crate is not just a crate. A pallet of components can mean one more radar set available for a sortie cycle. A maintenance delivery can mean the difference between an aircraft waiting in line and an aircraft returning to the schedule. A tanker plan can determine whether a formation arrives with options or arrives already constrained. A deck slot can decide whether aircraft are being launched for effect or simply being rearranged to keep the machine moving. That is why the support aircraft matters so much. Some move cargo directly. Some move crews and specialists. Some extend awareness over the route. Some exist so the larger combat fleet can risk distance without losing coherence. Some appear to be doing routine procedural work, when in fact they are holding together the timetable of the entire operation. Think of a long campaign not as one stream of combat power, but as a nervous system with aircraft moving signals, opportunity, and endurance from one node to another. Now imagine attacking that nervous system without needing to destroy every aircraft in it. That is where the air bridge becomes vulnerable. You do not always need to shoot it down. Sometimes you only need to convince commanders that the margin is gone. An air bridge collapses in stages. At first, nothing looks catastrophic. Flights still launch. Deck crews still work. Maintenance still happens. Cargo still moves. Radios still sound calm. The official map still shows routes open. Then friction begins to compound. A corridor must be rerouted. A flight takes longer than planned. A deck cycle waits on one late asset. A part that was supposed to arrive this morning becomes an afternoon problem, then an evening problem, then a tomorrow problem. A crew chief starts conserving assumptions. A scheduler starts building extra slack. A commander starts holding aircraft on the ground for certainty that used to be unnecessary. The outside observer sees delay. The insider sees the beginning of compression. Compression is what matters. In a healthy system, one delayed flight is an inconvenience. In a stretched system, one delayed flight forces a chain of smaller decisions that quietly remove options from the next 24 hours. A support aircraft misses its timing, an inspection slips, a sortie launches with a tighter recovery margin. The spare aircraft becomes the aircraft you were supposed to keep in reserve. The reserve becomes a fiction. The fiction becomes tomorrow's emergency. This is why the aircraft nobody films can decide the campaign. A fighter squadron can look ready on paper while the support architecture behind it is already developing cracks. A carrier can still look powerful from 10,000 feet, while its real question is no longer how many jets it owns, but how consistently it can feed, recover, repair, rearm, and trust the schedule around those jets. That trust is fragile. Consider the flight that feeds the war. It is not the dramatic strike package. It is the movement that keeps the strike package routine instead of precious. It may be moving parts, personnel, maintenance, knowledge, or time-sensitive planning material. It may be linking a ship to a shore node, a carrier group to a wider theater, or an overloaded flight deck to the industrial system behind it. It may look small on camera. Operationally, it can be huge. Because the support flight is not glamorous, people assume it is optional. Usually, it is the opposite. The less glamorous the movement appears, the more likely it is supporting something that everybody else already assumes will simply be there. Assumptions are what keep tempo high. When support aircraft are steady, commanders plan aggressively because recovery feels normal. When support aircraft become uncertain, commanders behave differently even before the first obvious shortfall appears. They protect maintenance windows. They preserve tanker margin. They avoid using the last convenient option. They shorten ambition and lengthen caution. That is rational command behavior. It is also how campaigns lose speed without announcing that they have lost speed. Fuel explains this better than almost anything else. People like to say amateurs talk tactics and professionals talk logistics. That phrase is overused, but it survives because it points to something real. A modern force can possess excellent aircraft, trained crews, strong doctrine, and real courage, and still end up operating below its potential because fuel timing, fuel movement, and fuel confidence are weaker than they appear. Fuel is not just a quantity problem. It is a placement problem and a timing problem. Where is it now? Where must it be tomorrow? What aircraft, ships, and crews must move so the next transfer is not delayed? How much risk are you willing to accept in the route that delivers it? And what happens if your opponent does not need to destroy the whole fuel chain, but only make the chain feel uncertain enough that commanders begin protecting it instead of spending it? That is a powerful shift. A force that protects its fuel too early can become timid. A force that protects its fuel too late can become trapped. The invisible controllers in the middle are the people constantly preventing both outcomes. They are not always literal air traffic controllers, although sometimes they are. They are schedulers, planners, deck controllers, maintenance coordinators, battle watch officers, and the people who constantly translate 1,000 small truths into one coherent decision about what may safely move next. Their value is difficult to film because their work is mostly subtraction. They remove collisions before collisions happen. They remove waste before waste becomes visible. They remove confusion before confusion spreads. They keep the air picture, the deck picture, the maintenance picture, and the routing picture from drifting apart. When they succeed, outsiders think the system is simple. When they fail, outsiders think the failure came out of nowhere. It rarely does. Most operational breakdowns are slow failures hiding inside ordinary routine. That is especially true in a fleet context. A carrier or expeditionary force does not simply need combat aircraft. It needs a reliable rhythm. Aircraft must launch in a sequence that respects deck space, fuel state, maintenance reality, and recovery windows. Replacement parts must arrive before the shortage becomes visible at the squadron level. The support aircraft that connect sea and shore have to function well enough that the larger air wing keeps feeling sustainable. Once that rhythm is interrupted repeatedly, the problem stops being one late event. It becomes a system that no longer trusts tomorrow. That is where the red team wins. A red team does not always ask how many aircraft it can destroy. A smarter red team asks how many assumptions it can poison. Can it pressure the route enough to cause rerouting? Can it pressure the tanker picture enough to reduce flexibility? Can it make one airfield or one maritime corridor seem unreliable? Can it stretch maintenance man-hours by forcing extra moves, inspections, or protective procedures? Can it make every support aircraft feel more valuable than commanders want it to feel? Because once support aircraft begin to feel precious, the entire campaign becomes more conservative. That is why an air bridge can collapse without a cinematic disaster. The collapse may begin as hesitation. The first sign is not always wreckage. The first sign can be that flight still exists, but no longer arrive at the right time, with the right confidence, under the right protection, for the right follow-on effects. At that point, the bridge exists on paper and weakens in reality. A war can survive many tactical disappointments. It struggles to survive a support system that becomes nervous. That nervousness spreads in a very practical way. A pilot may still feel ready. A maintainer may still say the aircraft can fly. A deck crew may still clear the space. But if the route planner, the fuel coordinator, the spare parts chain, and the recovery schedule are all carrying one extra layer of doubt, the mission launches inside a smaller universe than it did the day before. The aircraft may look identical. The margin around the aircraft is not. This is also why maintenance footage matters more than many viewers realize. Maintenance is not the boring section between exciting missions. Maintenance is the price of every future mission. A flight line full of capable aircraft is only intimidating if technicians, parts, tools, and time can keep turning those aircraft back toward readiness. Once maintenance begins competing with shortages, rushed schedules, and uncertain delivery, the air arm may still look large while behaving smaller. The same logic applies at sea. Replenishment footage often looks procedural. Hoses, stores, ship positioning, careful motion, routine professionalism. But that routine is the reason a fleet may stay on station at all. Replenishment is where abstract strategy becomes wet steel, timing, seamanship, and risk management. If that rhythm slips, commanders start thinking not about how far they can project power, but about how quickly they may need to protect what they already have. That is a different war. Consider the delivery aircraft that most viewers barely notice. When a VRC-40 carrier onboard delivery aircraft traps aboard a carrier, it does not look like the centerpiece of naval power. It looks like a support event. In one sense, that is exactly what it is. In another sense, it is the event that prevents the rest of the air wing from becoming stranded inside its own schedule. That aircraft may be bringing people who solve problems, not people who make headlines. It may be moving planners, maintainers, inspectors, or parts that are only urgent because a commander still wants tomorrow to feel normal. The public sees a smaller airplane and assumes smaller importance. Operationally, that is often backward. If a carrier can launch fighters but cannot receive the right people, packages, and fixes quickly enough, the carrier slowly becomes a machine that still performs power while losing flexibility. That is what support aviation prevents. It keeps the larger combat architecture connected to the wider system behind it. A squadron does not only need fuel in the tank, it needs the confidence that the next specialist, the next component, the next delivery, and the next correction can still reach the ship before a manageable delay turns into a cumulative one. This is why small deck moments matter. A logistics aircraft rolling to a stop on the flight deck is not just landing. It is closing a gap in the war's bloodstream. The same logic applies to the aircraft that do not move cargo at all, but move certainty. An E-2D overhead is not glamorous in the same way a strike aircraft is glamorous. Yet airborne, early warning, and battle management aircraft help the force see farther, sort faster, and understand whether the route around the fleet is still coherent. A P-8 on patrol may not look like part of the immediate strike package either, but maritime patrol and surveillance flights help commanders understand where risk is accumulating, where traffic is changing, where uncertainty is widening, and where the map may remain open tomorrow. Support aviation is not only about hauling things, it is also about protecting the decision cycle. The force that sees a route degrading early can reroute before panic. The force that sees tanker strain early can reorder the day before the shortage becomes theatrical. The force that understands what the sea lanes look like beyond the horizon can decide whether the next movement should be bold, delayed, dispersed, or canceled. That is operational leverage. And that leverage often arrives wearing the wrong silhouette for social media fame. The public highlights the aircraft that drop weapons. Serious commanders also watch the aircraft that prevent surprise, reduce ambiguity, and keep 100 smaller moving parts from drifting out of sync. Take away those aircraft, and the fleet does not become blind in one dramatic second. It becomes less certain by degrees. One route looks less comfortable. One timing window becomes narrower. One recovery option starts feeling too expensive to waste. One support movement that used to be routine begins requiring a conversation. Enough conversations like that and tempo dies under paperwork long before it dies under fire. Then there is the industrial truth underneath the fleet. People sometimes speak as if operational readiness lives entirely at sea. It does not. It is built ashore, protected ashore, repaired ashore, and modernized ashore. If a public shipyard needs recapitalization, if dry dock capacity is tight, if utilities, heavy equipment, and maintenance flow are old or constrained, that weakness does not stay politely in the background. It eventually rises into the deployment calendar. It affects how long ships remain available, how quickly major work turns, how much slack exists in the wider system, and how aggressively commanders may spend readiness in the present. That is why shipyard footage belongs in the same conversation as flight deck footage. It is all one war machine. The public sees a dock, a crane, a flooded basin, a ship moving inches at a time. The insider sees strategic timing. If a carrier or support vessel takes longer to cycle through the industrial base, the downstream effect is not abstract. It appears later as a thinner margin for deployment planning, for maintenance recovery, for surge options, and for sustained presence. The industrial base is not separate from war-fighting endurance. It is one of the places endurance is manufactured. This is also why maintenance scenes deserve more respect than they receive. A sailor turning a wrench in a hangar-bay is part of the same story as a schedule in a watch floor and a replenishment ship holding station alongside a carrier. They are all protecting continuity. They are all buying the next usable day. And continuity is what allows a force to remain psychologically aggressive. Because aggression in modern operations is rarely just courage. It is confidence that the machine behind the mission will still be there when the crew returns. When that confidence weakens, even disciplined units become more conservative with time, parts, fuel, and exposure. That is not cowardice. That is the mathematics of a support system beginning to tighten. Night operations reveal this very clearly. A force that can launch, recover, refuel, direct, and maintain aircraft after dark is demonstrating more than bravado. It is proving that its procedures are strong enough to survive when visual simplicity is gone and routine work becomes less forgiving. Night deck cycles, qualifications, and recoveries are part of the hidden tax required to keep tomorrow's options alive. If a force can only sustain clean tempo in easy conditions, then it does not truly own tempo. It is borrowing tempo from good circumstances. That distinction matters. A campaign that depends on perfect timing, clear routes, convenient maintenance access, and low-friction replenishment is not robust. It is merely lucky. The aircraft and crews in this briefing are what convert luck into repeatable procedure. They do not remove friction. They absorb friction. They turn surprise into adjustment instead of collapse. They buy time for commanders before time becomes the thing they no longer possess. And that is why the support system must be read as a fighting system. Not an administrative appendix, not an afterthought, not a background department that politely serves the glamorous side of the force. It is itself a combat function, because it determines whether combat power may be used with continuity or only in short bursts of confidence. Once you see the war this way, a replenishment oiler alongside a carrier, a logistics aircraft crossing to the deck, a surveillance aircraft expanding the fleet's awareness, a maintenance team inside the hangar bay, and a dry dock moving a ship back into the water, all become variations of the same act. They are all keeping the war alive one more day. Now bring the entire picture together. Imagine a campaign where the combat aircraft are still flying, but every layer behind them is slightly less certain than it was a week ago. Fuel deliveries are still happening, but under worse timing. Support flights are still moving, but with less margin. Maintenance is still working, but with more compromises. Routing is still open, but with more caution. Commanders are still approving missions, but with less confidence that the system can absorb another disruption. No single slide in that briefing says defeat. Together, they describe a force that is losing tempo. And tempo, once lost, is hard to buy back quickly. This is why the planes that keep wars alive matter so much. Not because they are glamorous, not because they carry the most fearsome weapons, not because they dominate recruiting posters. They matter because they preserve continuity. They allow powerful machines to feel routine, And routine is what lets commanders spend power aggressively without feeling reckless. When continuity weakens, power becomes careful. When power becomes careful, initiative starts drifting. And once initiative drifts, the side that looks stronger in the highlight reel may no longer be stronger in the calendar. That is the final point of this briefing. A campaign is not sustained by spectacle. It is sustained by movement that remains reliable under stress. It is sustained by fuel arriving where it must arrive, parts arriving before they are desperately needed, crews being positioned before the schedule breaks, and quiet professionals keeping the whole pattern from collapsing into improvisation. The aircraft nobody films often decide whether that pattern holds. They keep the front line fed. They keep the fleet believable. They keep the air wing from becoming a collection of expensive possibilities instead of a functioning system. And if they begin to fail, the war may start slowing down long before anyone on the outside understands why.